Uncle Jim and Uncle Bill were out in Jim's shed one afternoon late in the fall, cluing up work on their latest invention. They figured their greatest of all. A time machine was what it was, see, with two motors set on a rack, an Acadia 4 to go forward in time, with an Atlantic in front to go back. A 12 Elan engine was hooked to them both with a clutch from a 58 Dodge, and the boys had figured the trick of time travel one night on the beer at the lodge. Stephen Hawking was there, and he knew that the boys were the wickedest kind of mechanics. He didn't know much about make and break engines, but he was a good hand for quantum dynamics. If they could synchronize flywheels at just the right speed as they passed round the back of the sun, they could go to the future, go to the past, in the space-time continuum. And the works was set up in Jim's henhouse, with a few of the birds still on board, a half-dozen hens and 2 or 3 ducks, and a great big old goose known as Gord. And they were just about ready for a test flick through time, and the henhouse was painted bright green. New shingles were on, and the last bit of oakum was pounded into the last seam. "Where you want to go first?" Jim said as he boarded and sat next to a hen known as Floss. Jim said early that morning he forgot about his garbage and Susie was going to be cross. Jim rocked the flywheels to prime the old engines while Bill started the 12 Elan motor. Gord started the crank, the ducks looked uneasy, and Floss pecked at the hyperdrive rotor. Then Jim put the gas to all engines, and the henhouse rose up in the air, and with goose, hens, and ducks all in a big flap, henhouse and all disappeared. They went back to that morning. Bill put out his garbage. Jim thought about where to go now. Then he remembered they needed some beer for a dance coming up in Port Howe. Jim cranked the Atlantic. The henhouse took off. The boys took a dart in the past. When he figured it was back in the 60s, Jim shut off the spark and he cut off the gas. They topped off their gas at a Texaco station, and a gallon was $1.07. Picked up 10 dozen beer for the time in Port Howe, and a dozen was $4.11. "Fine save," said Bill, as they took off again and went darting about in space-time. "We should buy a Skidoo in 72. 'Twas a good year for the 12 Elan line." But Jim had been thinking of another event, quite a bit further back in time. This time when he shut off the gas and the spark, it was late March 1949. They parked the old henhouse just outside St. John's on a very fine day in the spring, then walked round downtown with a bit of a plan to alter just one little thing. Now, I won't say what the boys did that day. No, sir, I won't even consider it. Put it this way, I suppose, as far as I knows, the boys weren't exactly Confederates. They got home that evening in time for their supper, feeling well pleased with their day. Spent the next week fooling round in the past, adjusting some things, you could say. They went back 60 years in old Montreal to the office of Hydro-Quebec, changed a few lines on a contract they found, and we should soon get a pretty nice check. In 1949 they dug up the terms of union up to the judiciary, and soon we should hear from Justin up there, "Looks like you guys have control of your fishery." They had one thing left on their things-to-do list, and it may seem a little confusing, but if you're a fan of the Leafs or the Habs, I dare say you'll soon be enthusing. Don't ask how they did it. I haven't a clue. This isn't some kind of a test. But for the last 60 years, the Leafs won half the cups, and the Canadians won all the rest. And so that was enough for both Jim and Bill. They figured the world was put right, and I guess we'll soon see now if you agree when you turn on the National tonight. Now, they were down in their lodge a bit later on. Stephen Hawking was buying the beer, when Job Purdy rushed in with his face in a grin and said, "Boys, did you hear what I hear? They're saying the 49 vote was miscounted. A whole lot of ballots were spoiled. Peter Cashin beat Joey, Confederation lost, and we're on Republican soil." Well, Jim looked at Bill with a wink in his eye and said, "Well, now, my boy, that's sensational." And at the end of the day, I guess you could say that the boys had voted responsible.